It's so great to be up here, and thank you for inviting me to speak. Did you hear the name Philly in that song at all? It was in there. I heard it the first time when I came to Grand Valley, and Brooks College did walk-on songs, and I said, but they played it for longer, so you could really hear it. But it's a pleasure to be here and talking a little bit about my leadership journey and coming to Grand Rapids to lead the Grand Valley State University, right? You know, I'm up here representing the university, yet so many of you in this room actually were a part of the legacy of creating Grand Valley State University. It was really a story of public-private partnerships. It's the story of Grand Rapids. It's the story of coming together and say, here's what we need for our economic development to thrive. And I have to tell you, it was that story that brought me here to Grand Rapids to lead this university. I often say I was sort of happily, I did my PhD here in Michigan, returned to the East Coast where I grew up, and spent most of my years in New York and in Boston, and was working in a space, always in education, but was working in a space where the last decade of my role at the university was to spin off a new educational enterprise solely for the purpose of breaking down some of the barriers, looking at new models. At that time, digital education was new to this space, looking at developing a set of global campuses around the world affiliated with the university I was working at. And I got the call from the recruiter that was carrying the responsibility of finding the Grand Valley State University president, and he really was so compelling. And I remembered I'd spent a few times visiting Grand Rapids while I was here in Michigan, but I wasn't that familiar with all of the development that had occurred and all of the opportunity. And I was very intentional about looking for a place in education that I thought could, and this was pre-pandemic, of course I was one of the lucky leaders to come to a new role at the beginning of the pandemic, but pre-pandemic I was looking for a place that would be able to move with the necessary transformation in education that we need in this country and we need in our society. And what drew me to Grand Valley State University and Grand Rapids was the opportunity to situate a university both as a contemporary 21st century learning model and as an economic driver for the region. It wasn't an either-or proposition here. Everybody saw both sides of that really important coin. It also is a university. We are a place and a space that believes that there's not just a position between access and quality, that we can in fact serve, as is our mission, the public in the state of Michigan, and that includes drawing talent to Michigan as well as serving those that are here, and that we need to do that at the highest quality level. And let me tell you, the pandemic has certainly lifted the bar. It's lifted the bar, it's lifted the need for talent, the knowledge economy is lifting the need for new skills, it's lifted the need for enduring skills because change is coming so quickly. So that 21st century learning model that embraces the responsibility to teach in a way that resonates with today's consumer, today's student, today's learner, and be a part of a community that sees education as a piece of the overall tapestry to the strength of this region. And that includes the application of research and the ability to insert and integrate applied research into the learning model. And that's everything I saw here. An institution that was agile, had changed many times over its young 60 years, an institution that embraced all of those roles, an institution that didn't compromise on access, and had a high bar for quality. And I'm just so pleased to be here and be leading at Grand Valley. Okay, come on. So I want to talk about really 4 dynamics that I think we face. And rather than looking back, I want us to look forward together on where we need to go as education is a piece of the strength of our community. The first is, and so many speakers have talked about it as they came up this morning, the need for talent and the talent gap that we see today. The face of talent, the conditions of learning, and the opportunity that's in front of us. There was a report that came out just last week from Burning Glass, and it was an interesting report in that it grew, and this won't be foreign to you. It said what happened in the pandemic over the last 2 years in terms of the fields and where the needs are, and we certainly see the need. Technology is an infrastructure for all we do. Education is a technology business at this point, as well as a learning enterprise. Technology, health, mental health, public health, online commercial economy, all areas that have grown dramatically. Some are impacted more cyclically, some are impacted in a profound and consistent way going into the future. You can see some of those. And then in addition, we have that over 57% of the current fields today will be impacted by automation. And so the opportunities to think about learning in this environment in which the change is dynamic, the change, some of which is structural and some of which is cyclical, is really key to how we think about our educational institutions responding to the moment. So I learned a new verb this morning, and that was to be bamfed. So we are going to bamf education, is what we're going to do. And the first thing that I heard in Dr. Chang's comments was an abundance mindset. So you can think about the challenges in education, and unless there is going to be a campaign to do it for Michigan that increases our birth rate, that's what Andy gave me, a campaign that helps us to increase birth rate, we face a 13.1% enrollment decline that's behind us and another 20% that's in front of us, because we know what the birth rates are. But that is one segment of the college-going population. So again, a scarcity mindset might say, oh my God, what do? We have fewer 18-year-olds to teach. But if we think about all the opportunities that are on this slide to educate not only a workforce, a society, a community, leaders like you in this room who are here in order to be community leaders and business leaders, we have great opportunity. Our workforce that sit among your businesses and nonprofits, you have told us, there was a data point in a recent Talent 2025 research study that was released that over 50% of the workforce currently requires upskilling. That's an educational opportunity. Our population growth, the sort of responsiveness that we were talking about in the last conversation to diverse communities, to cultural competencies, to those that have come from outside West Michigan to join us in this incredible community, those growth opportunities are there and present for us as well. If not only our workforce, but our educational systems speak to those communities. 76% of the workforce wants some flexibility. And if we can think about ways to provide that without lowering productivity, we're also increasing ways for people to access learning. And on the other side of that, our educational models have to be able to speak to that flexibility. And we just went through a pandemic where overnight people were moved to remote. I don't like to say online because a lot of it wasn't true online learning. It wasn't models with deep efficacy and deep richness that help people to interact and respond and research and study. We did amazing work to make that shift and pivot. And we enriched what we did along the way. So we've got this incredible body of work that we have done that helps us to relate to the flexibility people want, and that can increase the percentage of people that will access education as they're in the workforce. And in this country, we have 39 million, in Michigan alone, 2 million people who have walked away from the current educational system with some college that we can bring back, we can be responsive to, we can appreciate the experience that they've had if they got it outside of formal educational models, that's okay. We can look at and assess what they have gained in terms of skills and competencies that may support them in the future or relate to an educational offering that we have for them. So for us, I think in education broadly, and there's other educators, other great leaders that we have in this community that are in our K-12 systems and in our other universities, we need to look at these 5 areas. We need to look at how we personalize the educational model. I think this moment, coming out of the pandemic, will help us in that regard because we are not going to see people that are predictable in terms of needing, maybe they've been a poor scorer, maybe they didn't have access to AP coursework, maybe they live below the poverty line. We know they're going to struggle in college without supports. They have unbelievable potential and great capacity. But if we push them through a traditional system with the traditional supports, they will struggle. But in addition to that, we will see people who have just been impacted by the last 2 years. They will be impacted because perhaps the mode of instruction that they were pushed to isn't the way that they learn. Perhaps they didn't have access to the proper technology. They couldn't find community support groups to learn. Maybe they were in a part of their curriculum that needed extra help and support and that wasn't accessible. So we're going to need to personalize and flex to a student that has very different backgrounds, very different needs, and very different learning styles. In addition, the modality of digital is here to stay, and if it's not the primary mode, so many of our 18 and 19-year-olds are anxious to come back. They want to get out of your basement, and they want to come to college, and they want to have the full experience of being on a college campus. But you know what else they want? They want the lecture to be accessible to them when they leave the lecture, or if they missed it. They will always want the modality of online to walk with them, whether it's a supplement, an occasional use for convenience, or a primary modality. We also have to rethink the skills and competencies. One of the things I love about Grand Valley State University is the depth of liberal education that undergird all of the curricular areas, and half of our students are in professional studies in their majors. But that allows those students, along with the most important thing we can teach one to appreciate, which is to be a continuous learner. Because if we don't embrace the fact that each of us in this room, myself included, have to continue to learn as the world changes, technology changes, science changes, all of the things we've talked about today, then we are going to limit our effectiveness, period, end of sentence. So we have to create environments that appreciate learning, not as something you get through and get a degree and you're done, but as something that's along your life journey, enriching your life in every aspect. We have to also improve the technical skills, digital skills, appreciation of automation and AI and all of the new domains as a part of our curricular areas or our foundation, because it is foundational to, I bet, everyone's business that's in this room. We have to reorient education to focus on the way people learn. There's some fabulous learning science around the way we learn. Not the way we teach, but the way we learn. And it requires us to really understand how we each individually process information. If we're an extrovert, if we're an introvert, how we take in information, how we relate to one another. We also have to improve our competency, cultural competency, as well as generational competency, to appreciate the lives of the 35 and the 40-year-old and the 45-year-old that have kids in a soccer game and education that they're trying to do online with one of their other children, and they're in the workforce, and they're pursuing their own education. So the opportunity, as Grand Valley has seen it, as Grand Valley has absorbed it and taken it in, is we think about it in terms of 3 commitments that we make to the people we serve. Number 1 is to empower their educational experience, which means to personalize it, to appreciate and want to relate to their lived experience, their individual skills and competencies, not only their major, but their mission in life, their purpose, what's important to them. That's an empowered learning experience. Second is that appreciation for lifetime learning. That's both for the individuals and the experience they have and wanting to continue to do that throughout their lives, but it's also that our curriculum and our supports can relate to them at different times because they're not offered just one way. And the last is a culture of educational equity. Across education in this country, there is great disparity. There's great disparity in educational outcomes for people of color, based on income, based on zip code. We need to address those, we need to support those, and we need to be vigilantly focused on them. All of that sits on 3 principles. One is just continue to push the innovation. Find spaces to experiment, find spaces to practice, find spaces to scale and support what works and to discard what doesn't. Second is that we have to be constantly focused on our value, which means that we keep price affordable for our families in Michigan that have a variety of different backgrounds and that can come from a variety of different levels of economic means as well as across the country and the world, and that we're sure that our education resonates for them, for the community we serve in West Michigan, for the community more broadly, and for their lifetime of educational needs. And the last is to have a growth mindset, to really look at those demographics as one piece of the picture and to not be stopped by that, to be encouraged to find the number of possibilities to create people who can, to support people who can be a part of an inclusive prosperity in this region. This picture of 11 sources of disruption was a recent Technology Futures report that you can see, the Future Today Tech Trends 2022 that came out recently. And it went through each of these disruptions with tech as the sort of thread that undergirded all of the disruptions. And when I think about, there we go. How about come back? Thank you. It was magic. I didn't even push anything. When I think about the leadership lessons that I take away from my journey and from being here as a part of this wonderful community that started this institution through a public-private partnership, I think about, I embrace the moment. I am so excited that 11 forces of disruption give us a new lens and a new opportunity to focus on a system that is ingrained and embedded and needs to be disrupted. The second is to, in this report that I quoted, they had this one chapter that said, know what's a trend and not trendy. And that really resonated for me. And I think the takeaway is trying to exercise a regimen of strategic foresight, is trying to work to find what are those through lines, what are the ups, what are the downs, what are the volatility that we need to follow to be able to plan 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road. I think that we can't do this alone. I'm very fortunate. I mentioned the educators in West Michigan, in Michigan, that I think have been incredibly good partners. We have alliances, we have relationships. We forged at Grand Valley a set of 7